there has been a lot of controversies and challenges over the years when it comes to female athletes being abused by their coaches. And I think that is something that is still going on up until date. So if you were to advise with your years of experience and knowledge on how this can be stopped, what would you say the athletes on their own end can do? And what would you also say the government, those in the sports sector, can also do to have this particular challenge that ladies face reduced?
First, the leadership of programs has to do a better job of screening applicants for coaching positions and be sure that they have really checked their character and their backgrounds, and that we're not moving people from one position to the other that have the same characteristics of abuse towards females. And sometimes I don't think we do a good job of our homework of screening these candidates. What can athletes do? We as women need to be strong enough to report abusive behavior and follow up on avoiding it and getting rid of the people that are causing it. And too often I think women are afraid to report it and be part of the solution.
Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to another exciting episode of Beyond the Finish Line with Star, where athleticism meets inspiration. A safe space where athletes come to share their untold stories, humble beginnings, setbacks, and how they overcame, diving into intersections of sports, lifestyle, and personal growth. And I am your host, Star Mpama. Without wasting much of your time, today's guest happens to be an icon. Yes, I called her that. She was a one-time basketballer, but I would have to read out her accolades. That is how special this woman is. So keep your ears open. She is a Women's Basketball Hall of Fame inductee, a 3-time Missouri Conference Coach of the Year, and all-time winningest basketball coach at Illinois State University. With a career record of 461 wins, he had led the team to 2 AIAW national tournaments, 7 WNIT appearances, and 3 NCAA tournaments. On the national stage, she coached Team USA to a silver in 1978 and Team USA to a gold 1983 at the World University Game. She was also part of the Team USA Olympic Committee for 2 Olympiads. She's also a fierce advocate for women's sports, the first elected president of Women's Basketball Coaches Association, and a pioneer of Title IX enforcement. Drumroll, please. She is none other than Jill Hutchison. Good day, ma'am. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing amazing. Oh my God, I'm so honored to have you here. You look amazing.
Oh my God, you're probably just happy to be through with finals and having a break.
Well, you can say that again. Anyways, I was able to go through what you sent to me, and when I saw it, I was wowed and marveled. I'm like, oh my goodness. I would say having that interview with you that day, it was an orchestration from God. I mean, nothing short, nothing.
You're silly. No, I really, really enjoyed it. I was so impressed with you. I was very impressed.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Without wasting much of anybody's time, let's dive into the untold stories. First, I want to ask, what inspired you to pursue your career in basketball, then moving down to advocacy? You had more fight on women's sports, which I observed. So what was the inspiration behind all of that?
When I was younger, I loved to play. There were no opportunities for girls. And I was in 7th grade. I had a chance to play on a basketball team. I think we had maybe 8 or 10 games, but I loved it. Then I didn't have any opportunities from 8th, 9th, 10th grade, and I really thought this was crazy. I mean, it's unfortunate that we didn't have those opportunities, and I kept thinking, boy, that'd be nice to do something. Then 11th and 12th grade, I was in a school where we did have opportunities again, and my teacher there was a great mentor for me. And she came from Illinois State. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and she had started a huge program in the state of New Mexico, and I just thought it was fantastic. And she always wanted me to go to Illinois State. And so I ended up coming here and was amazed at the women that were here and the opportunities. And that kind of catapulted my career.
Amazing. So you made a research as a graduate student, and you challenged the notion that women couldn't play full court on the basketball. So what drove you to tackle such controversial issue at that time?
When I was an undergraduate at the University of New Mexico, one of my professors was doing research with telemetry in women's heart rates, and I was one of her subjects. And I got interested in telemetry and thought, at the time, women weren't allowed to run in marathons or long distance because they never felt their hearts were strong enough to endure that long of a race and be able to handle it, both their hearts, and there was a lot of concern that they would be able to have children. So I thought, this is ridiculous. And so we put electrodes on 2 of our female players, and we played some exhibition games of 5-player basketball to see what their heart rates would go to. And they were well over 180, 200 beats a minute for an extended period of time. But it all went back to my experiences at New Mexico, where I learned how to use the telemetry equipment. And I had another mentor there who...
But now, looking at your time and now in when it comes to basketball, especially the women basketball, what would you say changed positively between your time and now? And what would you advise should be implemented to even make things better with your experience over the years?
The game has transcended any expectations I might have had 50 years ago. Once we went to the 5-player game, it was a continual evolution of better coaching, better athletes, better training, better skills, and now the female athlete is so much more conditioned and trained than what players were back in the 60s when I first started. And the game itself has evolved, but there are so many more opportunities for women now that it encourages younger players to play, to develop their game. They get the experience, they get exposed, and they get better and better. The coaching has improved tremendously over the years. I think women coaches are every bit as good as male coaches now, and that wasn't the case 50 years ago because they didn't have the experience. So the game has evolved. We've gone from a 6-player game to a 5-player game. We've gone to the 30-second clock. We've gone to a smaller ball for women, and made some changes that facilitated the improvement in skills. But if I were to want to make any changes, it would be to encourage young women who are participating now to pursue careers in athletics, whether it's coaching or officiating or as administrators, but to have more influence of women at the collegiate and the professional level, I think would be the most exciting thing to me at this point.
But now, having these women at collegiate level, I know that there has been a lot of controversies and challenges over the years when it comes to female athletes being abused by their coaches. And I think that is something that is still going on up until date. So if you were to advise with your years of experience and knowledge on how this can be stopped, reduced, changed, I mean, being someone who has who advocates for women, what would you say the athletes on their own end can do to reduce and stop such things? And what would you also say the government, or better still, those in the sports sector can also do to have this particular challenge that ladies face, have this been reduced?
I think first, the leadership of programs has to do a better job of screening applicants for coaching positions. Okay. And be sure that they have really checked their character and their backgrounds, and that we're not moving people from one position to the other that have the same characteristics of abuse towards females. And sometimes I don't think we do a good job of our homework of screening these candidates. Secondly, once someone does do something inappropriate, I think they ought to be blackballed from the profession. They shouldn't have opportunities to get back in. What can athletes do? I think that's really hard. I had some athletes that played in the very first women's pro league, and they were abused. And, you know, if you want to play, then to what extent are you willing to sacrifice to get those opportunities? Well, they quit, and that was unfortunate, but they had strong values and they didn't agree with it, and so they walked away. And I think that we as women need to be strong enough to report abusive behavior and follow up on avoiding it and getting rid of the people that are causing it. And too often I think women are afraid to report it and be part of the solution.
Oh, ma'am. I mean, just listening to you speak, I could tell that it's it's like a luggage filled with so much knowledge and so much drive, even after all these years. Now, this leads me to my next question. As the first elected president of Women's Basketball Coaches Association, you were a voice for coaches across the country. So what were some of the biggest battles you fought during your tenure? And what would you say to women basketball coaches who are currently coaching athletes now, like those battles you faced? What would you say people who are in now and probably are facing that exact battle, how they can navigate their way around it?
Yeah, they are facing many of the same battles, and it's not just basketball coaches, it's all female coaches. We always felt that basketball was the flagship for women's sports because it had more public recognition than many other sports. Therefore, we felt that we had to fight many of those battles more publicly and more aggressively than other sports maybe have been able to do. But obviously, trying to deal with male domination in the sports world and providing the same opportunities for women that there are for men. For instance, are women on television as frequently as men in any sport? No, they're not. They're probably 5% of the national television coverage. Should women in institutions have the same opportunity as men? Yes, they should. But do they? No. And Title IX has mandated those opportunities in the United States, but it's not enforced all the time. One of my pet peeves is that the men may play their games on Wednesday and Saturday. The women have to play on a same road swing Thursday, Saturday. So there's no recovery time. There's no preparation time. The travel time is compounded. That's not fair. And there's so many issues like that are inequitable for women that are still existing. And I think many coaches feel intimidated to have to fight those issues for fear they're going to lose their jobs. And frequently they do, because administrators feel and to some extent it's true. The men are making the money, so they should get the privileges. But if we promoted the women at the same level that we promote the men, what kind of financial results would we see from that type? And women's basketball just skyrocketed last year on a national level. I mean, crowds were bigger, therefore money at the gate was bigger and opportunities increased, but that doesn't happen on every campus. And I think women today, the Women's Coaches Association still has to fight those kinds of battles. And now that the NCAA has got so many new issues with the portal and NIL, there's even less equity for women because of NIL money. It's all a money issue. It's so much about finances.
Okay, so this NIL right now do you think it has done more good on the female aspect of basketball or female sports in general, or more harm, or you feel like it is the revenue being generated is going more to the men's sports compared to the women's?
There's no question more of it's going to the men. In general, I'm not a fan of NIL.
Okay.
I don't see how they can avoid it anymore, because student athletes are being used for advertising and things like that. Therefore, they have to compensate them and stuff. But I'm old school in that I believe a college education is worth something. And to be able to get a college education plus income on the side from that without the NIL seemed like it was great. How many college students end up in debt for years after college because they've had to pay for their education? Athletes get a free education. That seems great. Well, the NIL is going to make, it's no longer educational sport, it's semi-pro sports now, because we're paying athletes to play. So, that should be a real help to foreign athletes that want to come to the States, because so many of them play on clubs in Europe or in Africa or wherever, and they've not been able to get eligibility because they were paid in those clubs. Now they should be paid because college athletes are being paid.
And for the fact that these athletes cannot even be given eligibility, especially if you are coming in as an international student and there it is on your record that you took funds somewhere because of a particular sport you paid, and now the NIL is looking like it is still the same thing happening. It's more of wearing a facade on
Yes.
it.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Star. It's those foreign athletes should be allowed to compete now without any repercussions. I mean, having been paid previously should not affect their eligibility here in the United States anymore. I mean, they're going to have to make an adjustment to that if they have not already.
Okay, now talking about this payment, there has been like a notion going on saying some persons believe that the NCAAs for student athletes is more of a business now than being the sport itself. So it's like when you bring in an athlete into a system, it is now said that this athlete is a commodity that earns money for the school, the coaches, and it's no more, that athlete now is no more seen as a human, but rather as an object of financial gain. Do you think that is true, or do you think that it is not exactly how they put it out there, but but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's horrendous at this point. I think in the next 5 years, you're totally accurate. I think but the athletes have asked for this. I mean, the athletes have created the NIL themselves because they wanted to be compensated for things. And now they're going to have to pay taxes on that money. There will be expectations. It's just like a professional athlete. Mm-hmm. If you're paid money and you don't perform at a certain level, then you're gone. And I think that brings more of a accountability to those that are receiving NIL payments. And yes, I think it just makes it more of a professional environment. The new football situations, they are going to recruit just like they do in the NFL. And they're going to use their NIL money to set up professional organizations at the collegiate level. Yeah, so we've lost educational sport. It just, the Olympic sports are the ones that I fear are going to be impacted the worst because they won't receive the same amount of funds as men's football and men's basketball. And schools need more money, so I think my biggest fear is dropping Olympic sports and not seeing as many programs as we have now. And there's talk of that already.
Well, yes. There's a whole lot of conversation on that right now. I mean, since the new roster limit thing came out, looking at it, I know after the case was being won and they now said, okay, revenue gotten would be given to the basketball team, actually it was said that it will be given to the sports, each team in the sports. But we all know that when you look at Olympic sports, they really do not generate any revenue into the sport. And most of the money comes in from football and basketball. And at this point, now, if you look at the SEC conference, they had to reduce their roster limit from 45. They brought it down to, I think, 35, if I'm not mistaken. And
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so 35 and 11 for cross country. And for me, I thought about it like this might come down to that time where the Olympic sports might now want to have a Division 1 have in two places. You know, there was a time when football had Division 1, but like in two segments. So it's like Division 1A and B. And it's looking like track and field is also going to go into that gradually. And like you mentioned, it might just gradually shove it off completely, because at this point everybody now is looking at the funds that has to be gained. Everybody now is looking at the money that has to be made. And if athletics is not bringing that, and coaches are every day telling students, okay, you are here for this, and if you cannot do this, get into the transfer portal. If you cannot get us this, get into the transfer portal now, and which puts international students at a high level of risk. So if you're here and you're looking at your performance and you're not making it, you're not running fast or throwing further or jumping as high as you should, you begin to fear for your life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's realistic, and it's really unfortunate. But it's like Illinois State. Illinois State has to pay the Missouri Valley Conference, I don't know how much it is, $500,000 this year, okay? Why? Because the conference has to give money to the NCAA to pay for students that didn't get compensated in the past. None of those students are from Illinois State. None of them played in the Missouri Valley. They all played in the Power 5 conferences, but we, as members of the NCAA, are having to support that. So when you take that much money out of Illinois State's athletic budget, we don't have the money that the big schools have. So there have to be cuts someplace. And that's part of the conversation right now. Where can schools like Illinois State make those cuts and still survive?
And at this point, it is the smaller schools that are going to suffer it more.
Yes. Well, the smallest schools in Division 1. You know, it's interesting. Division 3 is still pure educational sport.
Yeah.
Although they can get NIL contracts. But theoretically, they don't have scholarships and so forth. And kids in Division 3 are there because they want to participate, not because they're getting money. It's so different than the big schools in Division 1. And when I say big schools, it's the big football schools. Football is the sport that just sucks up all the money in college athletics. And I love football, so it's really, it's tough.
Okay, ma'am, let's dive back into your times as a coach. So you achieved an incredible coaching record at Illinois State with 461 wins over 28 seasons. My God. What do you think made your team so successful over the years?
I had good assistant coaches who recruited good players. It's all about the players. It's the same with track teams. If you have great players, then it's easy to have great results. And we were blessed with some really good players. And those relationships made coaching most meaningful to me as well. To have relationships with those players that have lasted over the years. So, in addition to that, I need to say Illinois State 40 and 50 years ago was one of the few schools in the country that supported women's sports. And it was all of our women's sports, not just basketball. But all the women's sports had opportunities here that lots of schools didn't have in the 60s and 70s.
Amazing. Wow. I must say, Illinois State must have done really well for women's sports, and is still doing that.
They did. Yeah, but they had really good leadership. And in any organization, it's about leadership. If you have good leaders who can find ways to get everybody working in the same direction, then you're going to have good results.
So we should pray for more good leadership then.
Yes, ma'am. We should pray for good leadership. It is so crucial.
Okay, noted. So as someone who has witnessed the evolution of women's basketball over the decades, right? What progress are you most proud of? What are you most proud of in your fight for women's sport?
Yeah, I think the thing that has been most rewarding to me is seeing young girls getting excited to play basketball. When I first started, people thought that female athletes were all lesbians and they were just animals. And now it is so popular for a girl to play basketball and to get involved in those programs and develop those friendships through the programs. And, Title IX made a huge difference in that because it required schools to offer those programs. But we went from just a few hundred participants across the country to thousands. And I think to see young girls in sports and to carrying that on for the rest of their lives, that has impacted our societies, our culture, everything about where we are now, but around the world, not just here.
Okay, let's move a bit from Illinois to internationally now. Now, in 1978 and 1983, you coached Team USA to success at the World University Games, where they had a gold and a silver medal each year, respectively. What was that like for you, and how did it later on also affect how you saw the women's sports moving forward after then?
Yeah. In 78, I coached in the Pan Am Games with the junior team, and we came in second. That was very frustrating. Brazil was amazing then. Then in 83, the World University Games, and the team that I coached was actually the second team because our Olympic team was practicing and playing all summer in 83, and we trained with them. So we had really the second team. And when we went to the World Games that year, everyone else's first team came. And when we won the gold, it was a huge, huge win for the country. And it was, Russia used to dominate women's basketball. Australia has been extremely good. Brazil has been phenomenal. But a whole bunch of European countries were good. And I also helped scout for our Olympic team for '84. So I was overseas watching a lot of stuff. I recruited some foreign players, and so I was familiar with some of the foreign women's basketball. And I was always impressed. I mean, women's basketball around the globe is, I thought the U.S. was behind. We had to adjust our rules to be able to play internationally, and we did. So, I don't know, and women in other countries, I think, went through some of the same problems we did of having it acceptable for women to play, but perhaps they may have overcome some of those hurdles a little earlier than we did in the U.S. because of their club systems. So, yeah, it was very, I think everybody should visit other countries to see, one, what they're like, and two, how they perceive us and how we can fit together in a universe.
Okay. With your experience you were on the Olympic Committee team for 2 decades, 2 seasons, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 8 years.
Now, with that and what you see now, U.S. basketball team, what would you say was the major shifts of change from then and now? I want to believe that now is better compared to then. So what has been the major change, and what would you think should be done to make it even better?
You know, I think what happened in the U.S. has had a big impact internationally because the game grew really quickly here in the 80s and 90s. We had some really phenomenal coaches, Pat Summitt, Billy Moore. Those people were the cornerstones of our Olympic program and our collegiate programs. And as the coaching improved, the play got better, as that continued to happen and we were successful in the Olympics, then that spearheaded the WNBA, the professional league. And once the WNBA got established 25 years ago, they started paying more than players could make in Europe or anywhere else. Therefore, the European players started coming to the U.S. to compete. The best European players came to the U.S. to compete in the Pro League. And so that made it pretty universal. There are so many foreign players now in the WNBA, along with the American players. And then that in itself has increased the play around the world because we have some foreign coaches that are coaching in the WNBA now, and they go back to their countries and they develop their programs. So it's become intertwined, and I think that has made the women's game more popular internationally and certainly a better game.
So, ma'am, with all your experiences now as a coach, looking at the young ladies of today and the young men of today, you have coached all kind of athletes. You have experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly. What were will I use the word worst times? Because I'm sure for every amazing coach as yourself, there must have been those times you must have met those set of athletes and you were like, oh Lord, where did these ones come from?
Yeah, I'm sure everybody runs into that. Yes, I had my problems. There's no question. And I was sued once. In the 90s. Yeah. And an adjunct from that, not from the suit. The suit was dismissed. But was it, that some of my black athletes felt uncomfortable. That devastated me.
Because you were white?
Yeah, but because they felt that I didn't care for them as much as I did for the whites, and it was so untrue, and that hurt me a lot for them to perceive me like that. So I had to figure out how to change that perception, because perception is reality. And that was probably the most frustrating experience of my career. I believe I've overcome it, and I do have relationships with those players, but for that to have happened was just very disappointing to me.
Okay, so can you give us a tip of how you overcame it? Because I'm sure there are people who also face this, or who also face this same challenge you faced. For myself, sometimes when I speak to athletes and this coach doesn't seem to listen and all of that. So if I'm speaking to a typical African athlete, the first thing he or she would ask me is he white? Because I believe that if it's a black coach, he probably would understand better compared to a white person. But
Absolutely.
coming to ISU, for me, that narrative is the other way around. As a matter of fact, I feel like the white coaches here are really more accommodating. Not like the black ones are not accommodating. They are, but the experience I've had with the white coach over here in ISU, especially the head coach on track and field, he is more like a father. He gives that whole father figure thingy, and he's white. So for persons who are actually going through this stereotype now, being a white coach who genuinely loves a black athlete, but because of the color stereotype, what do you think can be done, or how were you able to go over it while you faced that challenge?
I think the first thing is for us to be in your shoes. You know, I didn't know where to send them to get their hair done. I didn't know where to help them with cosmetics and things like that female athletes care about. And, you know, I felt naive. I thought, oh my gosh, I need to figure this out so I can be as helpful to them as I am to anybody. And I think there has to be an open communication that is so critical to any relationship. And that to me is the most important factor, is being able to develop an open communication. I used to have what I call chit chats with my players. And every few weeks, every player came into my office, or we went for a Coke, or we did something just to talk about how are classes, how are things at home, how are you doing, and then to share ideas about their basketball. So, I worked hard at trying to keep open communications, and I think that's the key. I think that's what Coach Bovey does. It's harder because he has such a big team. You know, I had 12 to 15 athletes. He's got 40. And that's harder to have more intimate conversations with that many people. But in basketball, in sports in general, period, the relationships are the most important part of sports. It's all the life lessons you learn and all the relationships you develop that are going to last you a lifetime. You may remember one or two races, but you're not going to remember them all. But you're going to remember the people who touched your heart, and the friendships you made, and the friendships you've kept through sports. And I think a good coach nurtures that. And that's what I tried to do.
You did well, ma'am. You did amazing.
I missed a few, I'll tell you. I'm sure I did.
I when you talked about directing them on where to make their hair, you know, get cosmetics and all of that, come to think of it, people I don't think people of these days would even think that things like this were a huge challenge over then compared to now.
Yeah,
you know,
true.
Now it's easier being the Gen Z generation, so you can just navigate your way around and all of that.
True.
But I can imagine how tough it was for you then. So, ma'am, when you hear the word beyond the finish line, how would you define that in your own terms with your years of experience?
There's no finish line. The race goes on and on and on, and there are always more hurdles in the way and more things that we have to overcome to get to the finish line. But the finish line is the relationships you develop. But to think that there's a finish line in the sport, I just feel like we as women have lots of hurdles that we have to still overcome if we want to promote our sport. But as an athlete, I think your relationships are your finish line because they last forever.
Being a coach, a wife, a mother, an advocate, what would be the words you would tell to a younger generation as an athlete or to a coach? Because you have experienced life in every area, not just sports now, but personally, family, education-wise, financially, psychologically. I mean, all the Kalis that we can think of. So what would be that advice you would give a younger generation athlete, a younger generation coach, women who intend to, after sports, probably not push it into the pro level, but just go into life and pursue whatever it is they have studied academically? Because these days it's like everybody wants to go pro, but the sad truth is everybody cannot.
It's not going to, right?
Exactly. Everybody wouldn't go pro. And the question here is, what happens next? There's no plan to what happens next if we don't go pro. So what advice would you give to this person?
Well, for starters, only 2% of college athletes turn pro. 2%. So that means the majority of you have got to have another option. And my biggest thing is follow your dreams. Find something that you enjoy doing and that makes you happy and pursue that. That's one. And number two is do the right things for the right reasons and good things will happen. So when you have trouble deciding, should I do this or should I do that? What's the right thing? What's the right thing in terms of how you treat people, in terms of what you should do in your value system? Find right and wrong and pursue that.
It's been amazing. It's been short, but it's short and packed with so much knowledge to go home with. And I have been inspired, and I'm sure that the viewers or whoever comes across this podcast would have not one, not two, not three, but so many lessons to put into his or her life. Be you a basketball athlete, be you an athlete, or be you just an individual who is looking to navigate life. You just want to be in that place where you do what makes you happy and at the same time do the right things for the right reasons. So we have come to the end of this episode, and thank you, Meg, for doing us the honor. And I still remain your host, Star Mpama. Until we meet again, be good, stay safe, and bye for now.